The last lesson of this week is adding and subtracting these rational expressions. And we will see how this goes. I think that it's not super difficult, but there are a lot of letters in here, so don't get bogged down in all of it. So let's kind of back up and review for a second. If I have 2/7 plus 3/5, I can't add these as they are. I have to create a common denominator. And the quickest way to do that is to simply multiply it by each other. So I'm going to take this whole fraction, multiply by 7, this whole fraction, and multiply it by 5. Now I can sit and I can process through and find the least common multiple, but it's quicker and easier just to multiply it by each other. When I do that, I get 10 over 35 plus 21 over 35. And the reality is, if these were just number problems, we could use our calculators. When we have rational expressions, when we have letters in here, I can't enter that in my calculator. So I'm going to have to do it by hand like this. Now, when our denominators match, we add or subtract the top, and we keep the bottom. So 10 plus 21 is 31, and I keep my bottom, which in this case is 35. So we did fractions, or you do fractions, much earlier on than this in mathematics. Hopefully you remember that. If not, there's our refresher. You have to have a common denominator. The quickest way to do that is to multiply it by each other. Now that sounds really easy when we just say it in words, but what happens and where students get bogged down is when I have letters in here. Okay? Again, my bottoms don't match, and I cannot add or subtract unless they match, so I have to find a common denominator. The quickest way to do that is to multiply by the opposite denominator, not your numerator, by your denominator. When I multiply that to create my common denominator, I end up with 2y over xy plus 3x over xy. Now, the reality is this says yx, yx. I could have written yx, but typically it wants it in alphabetical order, and so I just put it in xy. The order doesn't really matter in multiplication, which is what I'm doing on the bottom. Okay, now that I have my common denominator, I add or subtract my top, and I keep my bottom. And we're sort of back to the same place we were earlier, in that I can't actually simplify 2y plus 3x because they're not like terms. So I just leave it as 2x plus 3y over xy, which the reality is most of us are going to look at that and think that top looks a little simpler than the bottom. But it's not when it comes to working with it later, okay? So find a common denominator, add or subtract your tops, keep your bottom. Here's where this is going to get a little long. And don't worry about trying to cram this in little spaces. Spread this out. One thing that I've learned, my number 2 kid has dyslexia, and so he really has to sort of spread this out and write kind of big in order to keep it all straight. Keep your work neat, and it's going to help tremendously. All right, one thing we have to remember from our first lecture this week, when I have something in the denominator, it becomes one item. I cannot separate it, which means I have x plus 1 as one item and x as a second item, which means my denominator is going to be part. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by each other. Okay, let me sort of erase this. And whatever I do to the top, remember, I'm going to do the exact same thing to the bottom. So spread that out so that your brain can process this, all right? So when I multiply everything together here to get my common denominator, I'm not actually going to multiply everything out just yet. I'm going to look at this, and then I'm going to add and subtract accordingly. My bottoms match. So I have 2x plus 3 times x plus 1. And then remember, I keep my denominator. And I know this is looking terrifying, right? Just focus on one step at a time. Now, after I write it out like this, I'm going to simplify. Now, one thing that I've noticed that sometimes my students do to make this easier is they pull the top off and they work with it by itself. So like draw a line maybe right here. And instead of working with all of it, sort of rewrite the top so you're able to look at just that. So if that helps, you can pull your top off, simplify it all the way down, and then put it back over your denominator. So to simplify it, that means number one, I distribute anything I need to distribute, and then I add any like terms. And this right here will have to be distributed. This will have to be distributed. Now remember distributive property, and this is another one of those things that this textbook sort of assumes you remember. You're going to do this times this, and this times this. Okay? So when I distribute this out, I have 2x plus, and let me kind of remind you how they got this. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 1 is 1. So there's my top. And then my bottom, x times x is x squared. X times 1 is 1x. And then I'm going to add any like terms. So on the top, I have a 2x and a 3x, which gives me 5x. And I don't need to write this understood 1 because it's understood. This is my completely simplified term. So number one, find a common denominator. Do that by multiplying by each other. Add and subtract, and then you're going to distribute anything, find any like terms that you can simplify. This is messy and long, just focus on one step at a time. All right, here's the next problem. 2 over x plus 1 plus 3 over x minus 1. So again, we're going to find common denominators by multiplying by each other. So this one I have to multiply by x minus 1. This one has to be multiplied x plus 1. So I'm going to sort of spread all that out. Then I'm going to distribute 2x minus 2, 3x squared plus 3. On the bottom, I have x times x, which is x squared. X times negative 1, watch your signs, negative 1x. 1 times x is 1x, 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. One thing when you're distributing is watch your signs. Then I'm going to add any like terms. Now remember, x squared is not the same thing as x. They have to match with their exponents and their variables. So on the top, 2x, 3x. On the bottom, x and x. So 2x plus 3x is 5x. Now, if you'll notice, I've changed my order of things here. There's this thing called descending order of variables that in mathematics, the mathematically correct way to write things is to put it in its biggest exponent first. X squared, x, no x. And if it's not in that order, it doesn't necessarily change the value, but if you go to take a college entrance exam or some sort of state graded, they're going to most likely require it in descending order of variables. Now, let's try a few of these on our own. Here are 4 practice problems for you to try. Just like we've been doing, give it a shot. If you want to work one and then check it and then work the second and check it, that's fine. But write these down and try them on your own and then come back and check them with me. So number 1 here, find a common denominator first by multiplying by each other. Oh, my pen, there it goes. So I'm going to multiply this by x, multiply this by y. So then what I have is 3x over xy plus 2y over xy. Now at this point, my denominators match, so I'm doing it correct. If at this point your bottoms don't match, you need to go back and try again, okay? Once my bottoms match, I add my tops, but they are not like terms. So they have to stay as 3x plus 2y. And then I keep my denominator, and that's it. On number 2, find a common denominator by multiplying. times 7 is 28. 7 times x is 7x. 5 times x is 5x. My bottoms match here, so I add my tops. 28 and 5x are not like terms, so I can't actually simplify them. So my answer just stays just like that. Let's look at number 3. Find a common denominator here. Multiply by each other. That b is terrible. AB times 1 is 1AB. On the bottom, AB times 2 is 2AB. 6 times 2 is 12. Match, so I add my tops. However, AB and 12 are not like terms, so they can't simplify. Now for my final answer, I don't need this one. So that is my answer. Now number 4 is the hardest kind because remember, this is one piece. I can't separate it. So I'm going to have to multiply my first term. I'm going to have to multiply my first times, oh my Lord of mercy, my first term by x plus 2. My second side, I just do by my x. I think we've all been doing math too long today. My brain's shutting down. So when I multiply this, I multiply y times x and y times 2. So I have xy. You could put yx, that's fine. Plus 2y over x squared plus 2x. Now let me clean this up because that is messy. Same thing on the second term. 4y times x is 4xy. And then my bottom is the same. Now, I have to see if I have any like terms, and I have 2xy's. Understood 1. 1xy plus 4xy is 5xy. There's nothing to combine with my 2y, so it stays right there. And x squared plus 2x, and that is my answer. Okay, now your homework is in your weekly to-do list. So work through that. If you get stuck, let me know. This is kind of complicated and tricky, and it's easy to get bogged down in. So I would do one, and then I would do some, and then take a little break, and then do some more. Your second assignment for the week is also some review from past stuff. We're probably going to do a review every week so we don't forget how to do the old stuff along with the new stuff.